Welcome to a Sisters Circle Empowerment Hour, where empowerment and community unite. Join us as we amplify women's voices and drive transformative change in our communities. Our show is dedicated to fostering collaboration and encouraging both personal and professional growth. Through riveting discussions and insightful interviews, we offer a platform for women to share their stories and expertise. Experience a space that nurtures synergy, promotes continuous learning, and celebrates women's solidarity. Be part of our mission to put women's contributions at the forefront of progress.
Welcome to a Sister Circle Empowerment, where we bring information to support the woman to be better than they were yesterday. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm hoping you're having an amazing day. I know I am, and I'm excited to have Lloyd, and she's the emotional chain breaker and is a catalyst for profound personal and professional transformation. After a decade in the corporate world, she built two entrepreneurial ventures, one in the apparel industry and other in design. But in 2009, she walked away from them, driven by a deeper calling to help those carrying the invisible scars of childhood trauma break free from the chains of their past. Welcome, Ada.
It is a delight to be here, Ida. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a delight to have you. I mean, just about how we are today came from childhood. You know, we all have different roads that we've traveled. Some as children were good in a sense, quote unquote, the American family on the outside, but not necessarily on the inside. So let's talk about why you gave up two entrepreneurial ventures to do what you're doing now.
It was what I had wanted to do for a long time. And I had looked at those entrepreneurial ventures as giving me the income to have the freedom of time to do what I really wanted to do. But the reality is, they sucked up all of my time and my energy and left me without the time and the energy to do that which was most important to me. So in 2009, after all of my kids were grown and out of the house and launched into their own worlds, it was time for me to reinvent me and leave behind the businesses that I had built and do what I had wanted to do for years.
Yes, yes. And we're so glad you're here. And why is this so much a passion for you to do?
I grew up being sexually abused as a child, long before it was on the public radar. There were no tools, there were no therapists, there were no books, there was certainly no internet. And I had to find my own path to healing. And I was able to do that, but it took years. And I just don't want anyone to live in pain when I know that there's an option, because I know the difference between living in the darkness of pain and the joy and light of emotional freedom. And that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, I heard that because we all need it. And we know abuse is a global problem for sure. And soldiers like you that have been through it are and making themselves available to help other people is so honorable in itself. Now, let's talk about some of the different areas of pain. Like, for example, you talk about imposter syndrome, you talk about the difficulty of trusting, the addictions, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about some of those things.
So all of those things are symptoms,
Okay.
and we are oriented in society towards treating symptoms.
Mhm.
But if you had a really bad headache and Tylenol and everything else you had tried hadn't worked, after a few days, you're frantic to see the doctor to get some help for this headache. And he runs tests and he comes back to you and he says, "You've got a brain tumor." Well, you're not focused on healing the headache, you're focused on healing the brain tumor.
Mhm.
The headache is a symptom, the brain tumor is the underlying cause. Childhood abuse experiences, bullying, those are the underlying cause that create the symptoms that in society we look to treat. So, a really good example here is addiction. If a child is in pain and they don't have any way of dealing with it and they don't know what to do, all they want is the pain to go away. And so if dad's got a booze cabinet or mom's got prescription pills in the medicine cabinet, or there's always the refrigerator, they're looking to anesthetize themselves to pain. They try something and it works reasonably well. So the next time they're in pain, they try it again. Then life becomes stressful. Well, it worked for pain. Maybe it'll work for stress. And it becomes a habit
Mhm.
and it becomes an addiction. So then they go to an addiction recovery program and they come out absolutely convinced that they have resolved their issue, but they haven't resolved the underlying trigger.
Mhm.
So, in the majority of instances, that addiction will reappear in one of two ways. If it was an alcohol addiction, they'll start drinking again. Or maybe they won't go back to drinking, but they'll trade it for another addiction like gambling. Regardless of what we're talking about with these symptoms, the underlying disease is what happened in childhood. Sometimes it's really big and horrific, and sometimes it's so seemingly small it doesn't make sense that it would be causing a problem, and yet it does.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
if we really want to deal with the imposter syndrome, with the lack of trust, with the addiction, with loneliness, with anxiety, with depression, with so many things that we look at as ills in society that we want answers for. The answer is in healing what happened in childhood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, a lot of times people that have gone through these things, they have a sense of shame. They have and because of that, they don't necessarily reach out to get the help that they need. So, let's talk to that person who's in that shame mode right now.
So, the most natural thing to do when you're in shame mode is you want to jam it in the closet, lock the door, put a chain around it, and pretend that it doesn't exist. And then we put out a facade that says, "I'm good, I'm competent, I'm capable, I've got this." But behind the facade, we're broken and we're crying and we're struggling and we're carrying the weight of shame. Locking things in a closet is about as effective as trying to lock smoke in a closet. It's not going to stay there. It's going to find its way out under the door frame or around, the side of the door or whatever. Those experiences find a way out into our lives and they impact us in our lives with like the symptoms we talked about a minute ago. So, one of the things with shame is our biggest fear is that somebody else is going to know what happened to us and they're going to view us as broken, diminished, of less value, or something along that line. Well, here's the reality: you are never responsible for somebody else's choices.
Say that again.
You are never, ever, ever responsible for somebody else's choices.
Mhm.
One of the things that we do in my program is we talk about owning who you are. Yeah, it starts with, what happened, but it's all about feelings. What happened, how you felt about it at the time, how you feel about it now looking back on it, and how you feel about what was said to you. Not what was said to you, because in all probability it was a lie, but how you feel about it. And then separating out that from the stories of abusers, bullies, and enablers. These people are masters at commingling their story with yours and making you responsible for their choices. You are never responsible for somebody else's choice. The line that we hear most often in domestic violence, but this principle underlies every kind of abuse and enabling, is if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have had to do that. You are never responsible for somebody else's choices. So we
Yes.
separate out their choices and wind up tossing them in the nearest dumpster. And then we still have the voices that are a legacy that we need to deal with, and we do that. But the pivotal point in somebody's healing and in them releasing the shame and the guilt and the fear is when they recognize that they were not responsible for what somebody else did to them. Now, does that give them power to live in perpetual victimhood? No way. They are responsible for how they allow those experiences to impact them in adulthood.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Because I mean, we've all gone through some type of trauma, some worse than others. And like you mentioned earlier, some things were very small, and you're wondering why you even letting that affect your life that way. But trauma is trauma, and it has to be dealt with if you want to live a productive, peaceful, harmonious life.
I have a favorite quote. It comes from Stephen Covey, and he said, I'm not a product of my circumstances. I'm a product of my decisions.
Mm.
Every one of us have circumstances that were never on our bucket list. Things that were unfair, that were hurtful, that were wrong, that were just simply not appropriate. And yet, what we have is the power to choose.
Yes, we
And
do.
those are the decisions that we make.
Mhm.
And I believe that freedom of choice is the greatest freedom we have in this world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can think of, you made me think of stuff that has happened to me at the time. I was angry, I was mad, but then I forgave because I didn't want to wear that on me.
That is so significant because so often society says, forgive. And it's like they're expecting to make it go away. And forgiveness is not condoning somebody else's choice. It's saying, I am not going to carry the weight of their choice and the anger and the pain and the hurt any longer. Because when we continue to carry that, we become complicit in our abuse because we are allowing it to continue to impact us.
Yes. Yes. It's like I always say they have real estate in your brain and your heart.
Absolutely. Perfect analogy.
So, Ada, if people want to work with you, how do they do so?
There's a whole bunch of ways they can connect with me. I'm on Facebook as Ada G. Lloyd because I got hacked a year or so ago and I had to get the G in there to put myself back up on Facebook. They can find me on LinkedIn on it is Ada Lloyd. They can find me on YouTube as Ada Lloyd. They can send me an email as to adaloyd@gmail.com. And, you know, I'm always happy to talk to somebody. Our first conversation is absolutely free because I want them to know that regardless of what their situation is, there is hope. Hope is such a powerful emotion, and it is the first step towards healing. And there's nothing that brings me more joy than to see somebody go from hopeless to hopeful to seeing possibilities become probabilities and probabilities become reality.
Yes. Yes, that's an amazing feeling. It's got to be. So, when you're working with someone, what is the first thing you do?
So I have a 12-week program, Achieving Emotional Freedom Now. And what it starts with is, and the first thing I tell people is, okay, you're going to have lots and lots of worksheets, but they're for you. You never have to share anything with me or with anybody else because the greatest insights may come as you're simply working through these things on your own. You'll have information and then you'll have questions, information and then questions. And the information is designed to connect you with your feelings. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, here's a whole long list about, I don't know, 25 different types of things that are abusive behaviors. Identify all the ones that you have experienced and who your abusers and enablers were. You don't have no details, just, you know, um, my father hit me, with his belt. Just some simple statement. And then this is what's crucial is which is the 800-pound elephant that's sitting in the middle of the room. And that's the one that is continuing to impact your life today in the biggest way. We're going to choose that one and focus on that. Because by the time you go through the program, you will have a tool belt. So you can go back and independently deal with whatever else you need to deal with because you'll know how to do it. And so once we identify what that 800-pound elephant is, if you will, we're then going to start owning your story. And it's going to be a little bit murky at first because it's something that you haven't done before. And then we're going to go into your abusers and enablers or bullies, and we're going to look at their stories. And you're going to say, well, I don't really know much about them. But you're going to find that you know a whole lot more than you think you do. Because it's like putting together a puzzle. And you get down towards the end and you find that you're missing a few pieces, but you've still got a good sense of what the puzzle looks like, even though you don't have all of the pieces. And this is very much like that. And so we're going to look at what was going on in somebody's life at the time they made the choice to abuse you. And a very common scenario in that situation is going to be that maybe dad was working at a job he didn't like, where his boss didn't treat him well, where he felt powerless and disrespected. So he comes home, bringing those emotions home, and he's going to claim his power. And he's going to do that by abusing you.
And
Now,
that's
that's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's a very common scenario.
mhm,
Now, in a traditional nuclear family, mom has no work experience and she's terrified that if something happens and dad has a consequence for what he's doing, she's going to be left with these kids and no way to support them. And so she becomes the enabler who hides out of fear. When we understand that they made their choices for their reasons that had nothing to do with us,
mhm,
we can then own our story and release all of the lies that we were told about who we were. The things about how, why can't you be as good as your brother at this? Can't you ever do anything right? All of those negative things that we hear that destroy a budding self esteem and tell us who we are, but lie to us about who we are. So once we have tossed all of the stuff with our abuses and in our enablers into the nearest dumpster, we're still left with the legacy of the voices. That voice in the back of your head that plays from what you heard. Well, we know they are lies. So how do you counter a lie? You counter it with truth. So to give you an example of how this happens, I had a client that was a bookkeeper, but she was actually a CPA, but she didn't identify as a CPA. And this didn't make any sense to me. And she'd had a happy childhood, and we were talking about some other things that had happened in adulthood. And one day, in passing, without it ever hitting her radar that she had said something significant, she said, in third grade, my teacher told me I'd never be a success in life because I wasn't any good in math. And she keeps going, totally unaware of the significance of what she said. And I've got bells going off in the back of my head going ding, 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 ding. And so when she was done, we were done with our conversation. I circled back and I said, tell me more about what happened in third grade. She said, there's really not anything else to tell. And I said, does that have anything to do with the fact you don't identify as a CPA? Boom, a light bulb went off. She didn't feel worthy of a designation she had earned because of what a bullying third grade teacher had told her 55 years before. She was in her early 60s when we're having this conversation.
wow.
So we said, okay, we've got to quiet that voice. That voice has cost you way too much. So we're going to look at the lie that you're never going to be a success in life because you're not any good at math. And we're going to counter it with 10 truths. Okay. So I started taking a couple of chances. How did you do in math in high school? I got A's. Good. How did you do in math in college? I got A's. Oh, good. And you're a CPA? Yes. Now, I knew the answer to this question before I asked it. I said, I understand that only about 14% of the people who take all four parts of the CPA exam pass it the first time. How did you do? I passed all four parts.
Wow.
Have you ever bounced a check? No. Okay, I want you to, we have 5 truths. I want you to now go create 5 more truths that prove what you were told is a lie. Every time you hear that voice say, you will never be a success in life because you're not any good in math, in your mind, I want you to counter it and say, no, you're wrong because boom, 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 and counter it with 5 truths.
Mhm.
Eventually, that voice will quiet to the point that it will disappear.
Yeah,
Then we can plug in affirmations, but affirmations aren't going to quiet the voice.
right.
They may try to mask it, but they're not going to succeed. It's still going to be there. And so a couple of months later, when I'm talking to her, she said, "You have done more for my business than all of the business coaches that I've hired." And I smiled and said, "Thank you, but I didn't really do anything for your business. What I did was help you remove a block in your life that was keeping you from showing up as who you really are in your business." And this is what happens when we break the chains to childhood trauma and we quiet the voices of inadequacy and we get rid of the imposter syndrome and we heal from the addiction. Yes, we may need help doing that, but those things will now work because we've healed the underlying disease. So
Yeah.
we're just treating the symptoms as a residue of the disease rather than trying to treat them when they're causing the disease to manifest itself.
Yes. And it's like, I mean, when you explain it, it makes sense. I mean, you have to look at what's real today. You know, how did you have, like you said, how did you do in math in school? How did you pass the CPA? Because most that CPA ain't no joke.
Yeah.
It's a very, very difficult exam. And you're absolutely right. Most people don't pass it the first time. So she just validated. You helped her validate what the truth.
Yes. So she could embrace her truth and quiet the lie that
Yes.
was keeping her from being who she really truly was. But it
Wow.
was hidden. It was even hidden from her.
Yeah, she thought nothing of that statement, but and it just goes to show you, we have to be careful what we say to people, because you don't know how they're going to internalize that. You don't know what effect that may have upon them. So you have to be real careful about what you say.
And we have to be careful about what we hear
Yes,
because so often what they say says more about them than it does about us.
absolutely. Absolutely. They're pushing who they are on you, pretty much.
Or who they want us to be because it works for their scenario.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Wow, Ada, this is so incredibly healing, just this conversation that we're having. And if audience, if you don't take anything away, please, I'm gonna say it in my words, do not wear other people's choices and get rid of the lies because it's not true.
You know, if I could say something to people as we close, it would be if you are carrying the burden of childhood trauma, big or small, you owe it to yourself and to those who love you to heal from it.
Mm.
And whether that's working with me, working with somebody else, doing whatever it is you need to do, I beg you to do it. Know that you are worth it. You're unique, and the world needs you at your best.
Absolutely. And again, Ada, how do people connect with you?
So find me on Facebook as Ada G. Lloyd, on LinkedIn as Ada Lloyd, on YouTube as Ada Lloyd, or via email as adalloyd at gmail.com. And by the way, Lloyd is just the way it's spelled in the lower screen here. So don't mix up the L's because people like to do that all the time.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Ada, for this inspirational collaboration. And I know that somebody is being touched by what you said, and it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense, but it's one of those things that you have to develop and you have to practice over and over and over again until it's part of who you are. For sure.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It has been an absolute delight, and I love everything you're doing, Ida.
Thank you so much, Ada. Likewise. I mean, we need all the soldiers we can get. Okay, my dear. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of connection and inspiration. Add to the vibrant tapestry of our community, where each moment we share brings us closer to understanding and growth. Together, we foster a space of love, resilience, and empowerment. Let the wisdom and insight shared today guide you on your path. We appreciate each and every one of you for being part of this experience. Many blessings to you and yours, and may your journey be filled with light and joy.